It started with a laugh. A cold, dismissive laugh that tried to erase my entire world. I was just a kid, waiting for my mom, my heart pounding with a fear I didn't understand. I told him the truth, that my mom was a hero, that she was in the special forces. And he laughed. He looked at my skin, at my worried eyes, and he decided my truth was a lie. That moment on the sidewalk shattered something inside me I didn't even know could break. But what he didn't know was that my mother was listening, and her mission had just changed. There are moments that cleave a life in two. A single, searing instant where the person you were ceases to exist, and the person you are forced to become steps blinking into a harsh, new light. For most of us, these moments are private earthquakes, a diagnosis delivered in a hushed tone, a phone call in the dead of night, the sight of taillights disappearing for the last time. The world doesn't see the fault lines spreading through your soul. But for 10-year-old Chloe Williams, her earthquake was going to be public. It was going to be witnessed by snickering strangers, recorded on a grainy police body cam, and presided over by a man wearing a badge and a smirk. Her cataclysm began not with a tremor, but with a laugh. A dismissive, grating laugh that didn't just mock her words. It tried to erase her truth, her mother, her entire world. It began, as the worst things often do, on a perfectly ordinary afternoon. The kind of afternoon that smells of freshly cut grass and promises of lemonade. Chloe was perched on a bench outside the unassuming brick facade of Mill Creek Elementary, her small legs swinging rhythmically, scuffing the toes of her light-up sneakers against the pavement. A bright purple backpack, adorned with a well-loved patch of a cartoon astronaut cat, was slung beside her. She was waiting. This was their ritual. Her mother, Sergeant First Class Maya Williams, was a creature of impossible precision. Her life was a series of timed maneuvers, of objectives secured and deadlines met. Picking up her daughter at 3:15 p.m. was, in her own words, a high-priority exfiltration, and Maya Williams never, ever missed an objective. Chloe's world was built on the bedrock of that certainty. Her mom said she'd be there, so she would be there. The sun would rise, the stars would shine, and her mother would come. But 3:15 bled into 3:20. Then 3:25. A tiny, cold knot of anxiety began to form in Chloe's stomach, unfamiliar and unwelcome. She scanned the stream of minivans and sedans, her eyes seeking the familiar, boxy shape of their old, serviceable Jeep Cherokee. It was nowhere to be seen. The schoolyard emptied. The sounds of laughter and slamming car doors faded, replaced by the lonely hum of a distant lawnmower and the whisper of the wind through the oak trees. Chloe was alone. The knot in her stomach tightened. Her mother was never late. Never. Another 10 minutes crawled by, each one feeling like an hour. The bright, sunny afternoon suddenly felt vast and threatening. What if something had happened? A car accident? The thought was a bolt of pure, icy terror. Her mother, her strong, invincible mother, who could fix a broken toy and scare away monsters in the closet with equal ease. What if she was hurt? What if she was alone somewhere, needing help? Tears, hot and insistent, welled in Chloe's eyes. The logic of a child is absolute. Her mother was never late. Therefore, something must be terribly, terribly wrong. Panic, a wild and fluttering bird, beat against her ribs. She needed to find a phone. She needed to call her grandma. She needed to do something. With a resolve that belied her 10 years, Chloe wiped her tears away with the back of her hand, shouldered her purple backpack, her astronaut cat seeming to offer a silent nod of courage, and began to walk. She wouldn't go far, just to the gas station on the corner. Someone there would help her. Someone would let her call her grandma. It was a plan. A shaky, terrified plan, but it was action. It was better than sitting on a bench in a suddenly empty and silent world. She had barely made it half a block down the sidewalk, her small figure looking even smaller against the backdrop of sprawling suburban houses, when the cruiser pulled up alongside her. It was sleek and white, with a bold blue stripe and the Mill Creek Police Department insignia on the door. The window slid down with a quiet electric hum. "Hey there, sweetheart," a voice called out, not unkindly at first. "You're a little young to be walking home all by yourself, aren't you?" The officer who leaned across the passenger seat was in his late 40s, with a face that had settled into permanent lines of mild skepticism. His name tag read, Officer D. Brenner. He had seen it all, or so he thought. Runaway kids, petty theft, domestic squabbles. This, a small black girl walking alone after school, fit a pattern he thought he recognized. A pattern of neglect, of inattentive parents. Chloe stopped, turning her tear-streaked face toward the car. The sight of the uniform, the authority it represented, should have been comforting. But the knot in her stomach tightened another degree. "I'm not walking home," she said, her voice small but clear. "I'm going to the gas station to call my grandma. My mom didn't come to get me." Officer Brenner put the car in park and stepped out. He was a large man, his utility belt creaking with the movement. He loomed over her, not threateningly, but his size was an undeniable presence. He clicked his body cam on, a tiny red light winking to life. "Procedure." "She didn't, he said, his tone shifting from concerned to mildly accusatory. "And where's your mom supposed to be?" "She was supposed to pick me up," Chloe explained, her words coming out in a nervous rush. "At 3:15. She's never late. Something's wrong. I think maybe she had an accident. I need to call my grandma. She'll know what to do." Brenner sighed, a soft, weary sound. He'd heard 100 versions of this story. Kids covering for parents who were at a bar, asleep on the couch, or just plain forgetful. He pulled out a small notepad. "All right, slow down. What's your mom's name? We'll give her a call, see where she is." "Maya Williams," Chloe said, clutching the straps of her backpack. "And what does your mom do, Maya Williams?" "She got a job that might have kept her late." He was already mentally writing the report. Asterisk neglectful parent, child left unattended. Spoke to mother, advised of responsibilities. Asterisk. Chloe drew herself up to her full height, her chin tilting up. In her mind, she was not just giving an answer. She was stating a fundamental fact of the universe, a truth as solid as the ground beneath her feet. It was her shield against the fear, her explanation for the unexplainable. Her voice, when it came, was filled with a pride that was pure and unadulterated. "She's in the army," Chloe declared, her eyes shining with a mixture of tears and fierce loyalty. "She's not just in the army. She's a hero. She's in the special forces." The words hung in the air between them, a child's absolute truth offered up with heartbreaking sincerity. And Officer Dan Brenner laughed. It wasn't a loud, booming laugh. It was worse than that. It was a soft, dismissive, condescending chuckle that came from deep in his chest. A sound that said, "Oh, you precious, silly child." He shook his head, a patronizing smile playing on his lips as he glanced down at his notepad, as if sharing a joke with himself. "Special forces, he said, his voice dripping with amused disbelief. "Yeah, I'll bet she is. I've heard that one before, kid. Come on, what does she really do? She a waitress? Work at the mall?" The world didn't just stop for Chloe Williams. It shattered. The sound of his laughter was a physical blow, sucking the air from her lungs. The pride on her face, the unwavering faith that was the core of her being, crumpled into something small and broken. He wasn't just doubting her. He was erasing her mother. He was taking the most real and powerful thing in Chloe's life, her mother's sacrifice, her courage, her honor, and he was grinding it into the dirt with the heel of his boot for a cheap laugh. The tears that came now were not of fear for her mother's safety, but of a pain so profound and bewildering it had no name. It was the pain of being told the sky isn't blue, that gravity doesn't exist. It was the utter demolition of her reality by someone who was supposed to protect it. Her small shoulders slumped. The astronaut cat on her backpack seemed to look away in shame. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. What words could possibly stand against that kind of absolute, smug dismissal? Officer Brenner, mistaking her stunned silence for admission of a tall tale, nodded to himself. "That's what I thought. Don't worry, we'll get this sorted out. Let's get you in the car, and we'll—" He never finished the sentence. The roar of an engine, raw and aggressive, cut through the suburban quiet. It was the sound of controlled fury on four wheels. A Jeep Cherokee, caked in a fine layer of dust as if it had just come off a hard trail, screeched to a halt behind the police cruiser, its bumper stopping a mere inch from the official vehicle. The driver's door flew open, and Maya Williams got out. She wasn't in a dress. She wasn't in business casual. She was wearing faded digital camo pants, dusty combat boots that looked like they had kicked down doors, and a tight black t-shirt that did little to conceal the powerful, coiled strength of her frame. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical braid. But it wasn't the clothes that made Officer Brenner's pen freeze above his notepad. It was the way she moved. She didn't walk, she closed the distance. Every step was economical, purposeful, and radiating a contained energy that was terrifying. Her posture was ramrod straight, her shoulders back, her gaze fixed ahead with an intensity that could bore through steel. This was not the gait of a waitress or a mall employee. This was the movement of a predator. This was the posture of a person who entered rooms where doors used to be. Her eyes, dark and blazing, swept the scene in a nanosecond. The crying child, the looming officer, the dynamic of power and pain, and processed it into a single, devastating tactical assessment. She didn't look at the police car. She didn't look at the badge. Her entire world had narrowed to the space between her terrified daughter and the man who had caused it. She walked right up to them, her boot steps unervingly silent on the pavement. The air around her seemed to crackle and grow cold. Officer Brenner took an involuntary step back, his sense of smug superiority evaporating like mist under a desert sun. His mouth went dry. The laugh was now a foul, dead thing in the back of his throat. Maya Williams stopped, her eyes finally locking onto his. Her voice, when she spoke, was low. It was quiet. It was the calm, flat, deadliest sound Officer Dan Brenner had ever heard in his life. "Is there a problem here, officer?" And in that moment, Dan Brenner, a man who had spent 2 decades believing he understood the mechanics of power and control, realized he knew nothing at all. He was staring into the abyss, and the abyss, wearing combat boots and a mother's fury, was staring back. To understand the tectonic force that was Maya Williams, one had to first understand the concept of the OODA loop. It was a framework beaten into her, neural pathway by neural pathway, until it was more instinct than thought. Asterisk, observe. Orient. Decide. Act. Asterisk, it was the heartbeat of a special forces operator, the rhythm by which they processed chaos and imposed order. In the dust-choked alleys of foreign cities and the silent, pressurized darkness of hostage rescue scenarios, the OODA loop was the difference between a mission accomplished and a body bag. For Maya, it had long since bled from the professional into the personal. She applied it to grocery shopping, to planning her daughter's birthday party, to navigating traffic. The world was a series of ever-shifting variables to be assessed, understood, and dominated with decisive action. This particular afternoon's objective was simple, sacred, and non-negotiable. Exfiltrate Chloe from Mill Creek Elementary by 15:15 hours. It was the highlight of her week, the anchor point around which the chaos of her duty roster and the ghosts of her last deployment reluctantly swirled. Those 20 minutes in the car with her daughter, listening to the exuberant, unfiltered download of 4th-grade gossip, math triumphs, and playground social dynamics, were a bomb. They were the proof that a world of lemonade stands and spelling tests still existed, a world she had sworn an oath to protect. Her morning had been a model of efficiency. A 0500 wake-up, a 5-mile run in the pre-dawn chill that felt less like exercise and more like a ritual of purification. A breakfast of eggs and black coffee consumed while reviewing pre-deployment paperwork for her team's upcoming training rotation. The paperwork was a dull-through ache behind her eyes, a bureaucratic entanglement that felt frivolous against the muscle memory of real-world operations. But it was part of the job. The Army, she often thought, was a magnificent war machine that occasionally required its most lethal components to fill out forms in triplicate. She dropped Chloe off at 0745, receiving a sticky kiss and a whispered, "Love you to the moon and back, Mom," a mantra that served as her personal body armor against the day's frustrations. The plan was pristine. Conclude the final team logistics meeting at the base by 14:30. A 15-minute drive to the school. A 5-minute buffer for unexpected traffic. Objective secured. The meeting started on time. Captain Evans, a good officer but one who loved the sound of his own voice more than he loved brevity, was droning on about supply chain issues for their upcoming joint exercise with the 10th Mountain Division. Maya sat perfectly still, her posture never slackening, her focus absolute. On the surface, she was the model soldier. Inside, a separate, quieter clock was ticking down the seconds until 15:15. Asterisk, observe asterisk the clock on the wall. 14:45. Evans was now deep into a tangent about the proper moisture-wicking properties of the new generation of socks. Her team sergeant, a grizzled man named Greeley with a face like a topographic map of Afghanistan, caught her eye and gave a microscopic roll of his own. A shared moment of silent suffering. Orient the meeting was overrunning. The objective was now in jeopardy. Annoyance, a spark she immediately smothered, flared. This was unacceptable. Her personal time was not a flexible resource. It was a fortress wall, and this meeting was a siege engine battering at the gates. She would wait until 14:55. If Evans had not concluded by then, she would execute a polite but firm interruption. The mission parameters demanded it. At 14:53, her personal cell phone, set to vibrate, hummed against her thigh. A violation of meeting protocol, but one she allowed only for 2 contacts, Chloe's school and her mother. A cold finger of dread traced her spine. She palmed the phone under the table, her eyes never leaving Evans. The screen glowed with a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was for Mill Creek. The cold finger became an ice pick. She stood up. The movement was so sudden and decisive that Captain Evans stopped mid-sentence about sock seam placement. "Sir, my apologies. Family emergency. I have to go. Now." Her voice left no room for question or argument. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a flat finality that brooked no dissent. It was the voice she used when a plan was going sideways and there was no time for debate. Evans blinked, startled. "Williams, we're almost. Greeley has the con, sir. He can brief me later." She was already moving, grabbing her cap from the table, her movements a study in controlled urgency. She didn't run. Operators never ran unless they had to. But her walk was a thing of terrifying speed and purpose, a glide that ate the distance to the door. In the hallway, she called the number back. It rang twice before a harried female voice answered. "Mill Creek Elementary Office, this is Brenda." "This is Sergeant First Class Maya Williams. You just called me." Her voice was tight, each word a clipped bullet. "Oh yes, Sergeant Williams. Nothing to be alarmed about," the woman said, her tone artificially bright. "We're just doing a quick check on our emergency contact forms. It seems the number we have for you on file might be out of date. We tried the cell number listed and it was disconnected." Maya stopped walking, closing her eyes for a fraction of a second. A wave of pure, undiluted fury washed over her, so potent it was a taste in her mouth. They had pulled her from a critical meeting, triggered her deepest operational alarm bells, the safety of her child, for administrative paperwork. She took a breath, the kind of breath you take before sighting in on a target at 800 meters. "The number is correct," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You will update your system. You will not use that number for non-emergencies again. Is that understood?" The woman on the other end of the line stammered an apology. Maya didn't hear it. She ended the call. Observe 14:57. The buffer was gone. The objective was now critical. She broke into a run. Not a panicked sprint, but the long ground-eating lope of a distance runner, every muscle working in efficient harmony. Her truck was parked 2 lots over. The 15-minute drive would now have to be done in 10. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. The main gate off the base was clogged. A delivery truck had stalled, its hazard lights blinking with a lazy, infuriating rhythm. A young MP was directing traffic, but he was new, his movements hesitant, creating more confusion than he solved. Maya's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The OODA loop was spinning now, a frantic gyroscope in her mind. Observe gridlock. Inefficiency. A failing in the system. Orient precious seconds were bleeding away. Chloe would be waiting. Alone. The thought was a physical pain in her chest. Decide this avenue of approach was compromised. She needed an alternate route. She threw the Jeep into reverse, executed a brutal 3-point turn that made the tires screech in protest, and gunned it towards the rarely used North Gate. The North Gate added 3 miles to her trip. 3 miles of back roads she pushed the old Jeep to its limits on, taking curves at speeds that would have earned anyone else a reckless driving charge. She didn't care. The only law that mattered was the law of a mother's promise. She hit the main road into town. 1510. A train. A long, slow, endless freight train was cutting across the main thoroughfare, its cars clacking by with a maddening, lethargic certainty. She slammed her palm against the steering wheel, a sharp, explosive crack of sound. A curse, vile and guttural, tore from her throat. This was no longer frustration. This was a deep, primal fear taking root. Chloe would be the last kid. She would be sitting on that bench, watching every other child be claimed, her little face growing more confused and scared with each passing minute. The image was a knife twisting in Maya's gut. The final car passed. The gates lifted. She floored the accelerator, the Jeep lurching forward. She was a quarter mile from the school, visualizing the relief on Chloe's face, rehearsing her apology, promising a triple scoop ice cream cone as reparations, when she saw it. The police cruiser, idling on the side of the road. And her daughter, her small, beautiful daughter, standing before a large, uniformed man. Her body language was a textbook of distress, slumped shoulders, head down, the purple backpack looking like a crushing weight. And the man, he was laughing. It wasn't a kind laugh. Maya had spent a lifetime studying body language, reading micro-expressions in the faces of potential threats, allies, and hostages. She could read the tone of a laugh from a kilometer away. This was dismissive, patronizing, cruel. Every ounce of her training, every hardened instinct forged in fire and blood, focused into a laser beam of pure intent. The OODA loop was complete. The observation was catastrophic. The orientation was one of immediate and profound threat to her child. The decision was made in a nanosecond. The action was inevitable. She didn't park. She inserted her vehicle into the situation, a statement of arrival written in screeching rubber and dust. The door of the Jeep was not opened. It was weaponized, flung outward as she erupted from the driver's seat. The camo pants and dusty boots were not a costume. They were the uniform of her reality, a reality this man, with his smug laugh and his petty authority, could not possibly comprehend. The strength in her frame wasn't for show. It was the product of countless hours humping an 80-pound rucksack over mountains, of hauling a wounded teammate to safety, of holding a defensive position through a long, terrifying night. As she closed the distance, her eyes did not see a police officer. They saw a hostile element engaging a high-value asset. They saw a power imbalance being exploited. They saw her daughter's spirit, which she protected with the ferocity of a lioness, being crushed under the boot of casual, ignorant arrogance. The fear she'd felt moments before, the fear of being late, of causing worry, was instantly and utterly incinerated in the white-hot furnace of her rage. It was replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. Her voice, when she spoke, was the calm at the center of the hurricane. It was the last thing a target heard before the world went black. "Is there a problem here, officer?" The man's face underwent a fascinating, rapid series transformation. The condescending amusement evaporated, replaced by shock, then by a dawning, stomach-churning realization. He saw the clothes, but more importantly, he saw the eyes. He saw the posture. He saw the absolute, unshakable certainty in her presence. This was no waitress. This was no mall employee spinning fables. This was a predator who had just identified him as a threat. And in that moment, the calculus of the entire situation flipped. The authority of his badge, the weight of his cruiser, the protocol of his bodycam, they all shriveled into insignificance against the raw, unleashed gravity of a mother who was also, unequivocally, a warrior. He had been laughing at a story. He was now staring into the truth of it, and the truth was staring back with a promise of utter ruin in its eyes. For a span of time that felt both infinite and instantaneous, the universe consisted of 3 points: the terrified eyes of a child, the cold, assessing gaze of a soldier, and the crumbling interior of a man who suddenly knew, with a certainty that felt like a death sentence, that he had made a catastrophic error. The sound of the Jeep's door slamming shut was the period at the end of Officer Dan Brenner's old world. The woman, Maya Williams, didn't just stand there. She occupied the space. The air around her seemed to warp, becoming denser, charged with a potential for violence that was as palpable as the weight of his own service weapon. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of capability. A coiled rattlesnake doesn't need to rattle to communicate the danger it represents. His training, the 20-year-old script of authority and procedure, dissolved into static. The condescending smile was frozen on his face, a grotesque mask that no longer fit the reality of the situation. His brain, frantically trying to recategorize the threat, could only latch onto insignificant details. The fine layer of dust on her boots, the way her hands hung loose and ready at her sides, the absolute stillness of her head. She wasn't blinking. Chloe's small gasp broke the silence. "Mommy!" The word was a lance of pure, undiluted relief and anguish. It wasn't just a greeting, it was an accusation. It was a testament to the fear she had endured, a fear he had compounded with his laughter. The sound of it made Maya's eyes flicker down to her daughter for a fraction of a second. The look that passed between them was a whole conversation, a check for injuries, a silent apology, a reaffirmation of an unbreakable bond. Then her eyes were back on him, and the temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "Is there a problem here, officer?" she repeated. Her voice hadn't risen in volume. If anything, it was quieter, more focused. It was the voice of someone who was used to being heard in the midst of chaos without ever having to raise it. Dan's mouth opened, but his tongue felt like a piece of old leather. The notepad in his hand was suddenly absurd, a prop from a play that had just been cancelled. Ma'am, we were just..." He gestured vaguely at Chloe, a useless, flailing motion. The child was unattended. "School's been out for some time. Protocol dictates we..." "The child," Maya interrupted, her voice slicing through his stammering like a scalpel, "has a name. It's Chloe. And she was not unattended. She was waiting for me. I was detained." Her eyes scanned him, up and down, a swift, merciless assessment. They didn't linger on his face, but on his equipment, his posture, the way he held himself. It was the way a mechanic looks at a faulty engine, diagnosing the weakness. Her gaze paused on the body cam, its little red light still dutifully recording. A micro-expression, something between contempt and grim satisfaction, flickered across her features. Asterisk good. Let it record. Asterisk. "She expressed concern for your welfare," Dan managed to say, trying to claw back some shred of professional footing. It was the wrong thing to say. He knew it as soon as the words left his mouth. Maya took a single step forward. It wasn't an aggressive lunge. It was a subtle shift of weight, a closing of the distance that felt less like movement and more like a predator adjusting its stance before a strike. He instinctively took a half step back, his heel scraping against the pavement. The sound was embarrassingly loud. "Did she?" Maya's head tilted a fraction of an inch. "And what was your response to her concern, officer?" Her eyes dropped to his name tag, and the pause before she said his name was somehow more damning than if she'd shouted it. "Brenner, did you offer reassurance? Did you attempt to contact me? Or the emergency contact listed in the school system that you are, no doubt, supposed to have access to?" Each question was a hammer blow, delivered with a terrifying calm. She was dismantling him, piece by piece, exposing the lazy, arrogant assumptions that had underpinned his every action. She made a claim," Dan said, the defensiveness in his voice making him sound weak and petty even to his own ears. "An outlandish claim. I was simply trying to ascertain the truth of the situation." The word outlandish hung in the air like a bad smell. Maya's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "What claim was that, officer?" Dan felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. He couldn't say it. He couldn't repeat the words he had laughed at. To give them voice now, in the presence of the living, breathing truth of them, would be a form of professional suicide. He remained silent, his jaw clenched. It was Chloe who spoke, her small voice thick with tears but now fortified by her mother's presence. "I told him, Mommy. I told him you were a hero in the Special Forces. And he laughed at me." The word laughed landed with the force of a physical blow. Maya's body didn't move, but something in her face shifted. The cold assessment in her eyes was joined by something darker, more ancient. A primal fury. She looked from her daughter's devastated face back to him. The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound Dan Brenner had ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking all the oxygen out of the world. He could feel the tiny red eye of the body cam on his face, capturing his floundering, his panic, his utter loss of control. Finally, Maya spoke. Her voice was so low it was almost a whisper, but it carried with the clarity of a gunshot in the dead of night. "You laughed." It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. She took another step, and now she was well inside his personal space, a violation he would never have tolerated from anyone else. But he was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the sheer force of her presence. "Let me explain something to you, Officer Brenner," she said, her eyes locked on his. "My daughter knows the sound of incoming mortar fire. She knows what it means when I pack my rucksack for a months-long rotation. She knows how to video call a father who is deployed on the other side of the world because her mother is the one who has to leave. She has spent birthdays and Christmases with a photograph because her mother was in a desert or a mountain range, doing a job so that you can stand on this clean, safe street and feel entitled to laugh at her." Each sentence was a precise, targeted round. They weren't meant to wound, they were meant to destroy. They tore through the fabric of his prejudice and laid bare the ugly, ignorant core of it. "The word hero is hers," Maya continued, her voice gaining a razor's edge. "She chooses to use it. I do not. I am a soldier, a non-commissioned officer. My job is to follow orders, to protect my team, and to execute the mission I am given. It is a job of sacrifice. It is a job of hardship. It is a job that requires me to be late, on rare occasion, because I am dealing with matters of life and death that, I assure you, are far more pressing than your protocol." She glanced down at Chloe, and her expression softened for a microsecond, a fleeting crack in the armor. "The one thing that job never requires is for my child to be mocked by a man who confuses a badge for a crown." Dan felt the world tilt. The solid ground of his certainties was giving way beneath his feet. He saw, with a horrifying clarity, the scene from her perspective, a tired soldier racing from her duty to keep a promise to her child, only to find her daughter being bullied by the very person sworn to serve and protect. He saw his own smug face, heard his own condescending laugh. Shame, hot and acidic, flooded his veins. "Ma'am, he began, but the apology died in his throat. What could he possibly say? "I'm sorry, I didn't believe a little black girl could have a mother who was a war hero." The words were too vile to speak. Maya didn't wait for his apology. She had already dismissed him. She turned her back to him, a move of such profound disregard it was more insulting than any confrontation. She knelt down in front of Chloe, her entire being transforming. The warrior was gone, replaced entirely by the mother. "Hey, baby girl," she said, her voice now warm and soft, a complete universe away from the tone she had used with him. She cupped Chloe's face in her hands, her thumbs wiping away the tears. "I am so sorry I was late. There was a problem at work. There is no excuse. It will never happen again. Are you okay?" Chloe threw her arms around her mother's neck, burying her face in the familiar, safe smell of her. "He laughed, Mommy," she sobbed into her shoulder. "I know, sweetheart. I know." Maya held her tightly, her eyes closing for a moment as she absorbed her daughter's pain. When she opened them, she looked over Chloe's shoulder, directly at Dan Brenner. The message in that look was clear. "You did this." She stood up, keeping one arm firmly around Chloe's shoulders. She looked at the body cam again. "The situation is resolved, officer," she stated, her voice flat and official once more. "I will be taking my daughter home now. I trust there will be no further protocol issues." It was a command, not a question. Without waiting for a response, she turned and guided Chloe toward the Jeep. She opened the passenger door, helped her daughter in, and buckled her seatbelt with a tenderness that was a stark contrast to the lethal energy of moments before. She walked around to the driver's side, got in, and started the engine. The Jeep pulled smoothly away from the curb. Dan Brenner stood alone on the sidewalk, watching the taillights disappear. The late afternoon sun felt cold. The chirping of the birds sounded like mockery. The body cam was still running, a silent witness to his humiliation. He was a statue of failure, the echo of a child's sobs and a soldier's cold fury ringing in his ears. The world had righted itself on its axis, but he had been knocked clean off. He had not just been corrected. He had been dismantled. And he knew, with a sickening certainty, that the recording on that body cam was not the end of this. It was only the beginning. The community center auditorium was full to bursting. It was a cross-section of Mill Creek itself, veterans in faded caps sitting ramrod straight beside fidgeting children, elderly couples holding hands, young parents with strollers in the aisles, teachers, shop owners, and a solid, respectful block of blue police officers in their dress uniforms, Chief Edwards among them. The air hummed with a low, expectant murmur, a collective holding of breath. This wasn't a ceremony, it was a catharsis. On the stage, a simple podium was flanked by two large screens. One displayed the Mill Creek Police Department's new seal, the other was dark. The event had been billed as a community partnership initiative rollout, but everyone knew it was more than that. It was a reckoning, publicly acknowledged and publicly addressed. Backstage, Dan Brenner adjusted his tie for the 10th time. His palms were slick with sweat. The uniform he wore felt different now. It wasn't a shell of authority anymore. It was a responsibility, one he felt the weight of acutely. He caught his reflection in a darkened monitor. The man who looked back was older, the lines on his face deeper, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in years. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to serve, finally understanding what that word meant. Across the room, Maya Williams stood with Chloe, now 11, her hand resting gently on her daughter's shoulder. Chloe wore a simple dress, her astronaut cat patch pinned proudly to its collar. She wasn't the terrified little girl on the sidewalk anymore. The experience had scoured her, but in the way fire tempers steel, it had left her stronger, more empathetic, with a quiet maturity that sometimes took Maya's breath away. Maya herself was in her Class A uniform, her rows of ribbons and badges a silent, powerful testament to the service that had once been a source of mockery. She was here not as a plaintiff, but as a participant, a partner. Chief Edwards walked to the podium, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice echoing in the hush. A little over a year ago, an incident occurred in our town that exposed a fracture. It was a failure of understanding, of empathy, and of duty. It was captured on a body cam and, as you know, it spread far beyond our borders. We were faced with a choice, to be defined by that failure, or to be defined by our response to it. He spoke not with defensive bluster, but with a sober, earnest gravity. He outlined the changes that had been painstakingly implemented, the revised de-escalation training co-developed with community leaders, the implicit bias workshops that were now mandatory and ongoing, the new youth outreach programs designed to build bridges before they were ever needed. He spoke of policy, but his subtext was about people. "But policy is just words on paper," the chief said, looking out at the audience. "It only means something if the people enacting it have changed hearts and minds. Today is about that change." He turned to the dark screen. "What you are about to see is that original body cam footage. We are not showing it to shame anyone, but to acknowledge the truth of where we were, and to provide context for where we are going." A collective tension gripped the room. Maya's hand tightened on Chloe's shoulder. Dan Brenner closed his eyes for a second, steeling himself. The video played. There was the sunny sidewalk, the nervous little girl, the towering officer. The audio was crisp, every word a tiny dagger. The audience watched, a wave of uncomfortable shifting moving through them as Chloe's voice, small and proud, declared her mother a hero. And then it came, the laugh. It was even uglier, even more dismissive, in this public forum than it had been in memory. A gasp, followed by a low, angry murmur, rippled through the crowd. Then Maya's arrival. The sheer, terrifying power of her presence was palpable even through the screen. The audience watched, rapt, as the confrontation unfolded, as Dan Brenner's arrogance crumbled into dust under her gaze. They saw the moment he broke. The footage ended with the Jeep driving away, leaving the officer standing alone, a monument to his own failure. The screen went black. The silence in the auditorium was absolute, heavy with shared second-hand shame and anger. Chief Edwards returned to the podium. His face was grim. That was a difficult thing to watch. It should be. It was a failure. But the story doesn't end there. He turned. Officer Brenner. Every head turned as Dan walked out from the wings. His steps were measured, his face pale but resolute. He did not go to the podium. He walked to the center of the stage and turned to face the audience. He looked out at them, at the faces of his community, and he saw the judgment, the curiosity, the anger. He took a deep breath, his eyes finding Maya and Chloe in the front row. He gave them a small, almost imperceptible nod. And then he did the one thing no one expected. He removed his hat, held it in his hands, and he bowed. Not a quick, perfunctory nod, but a deep, formal bow from the waist, holding it for a long 3 seconds. It was a gesture of profound respect, of apology, of humility. When he straightened up, his eyes were glistening. He walked to the podium, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. He didn't read from notes. "A year ago," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I stood on a sidewalk and I used my authority not to protect, but to diminish. I saw a child in distress and I dismissed her. I heard a truth and I called it a lie. I was entrusted with power and I wielded it with arrogance. There is no excuse for my behavior that day. None." He paused, swallowing hard, gathering his thoughts. The room was utterly still. The person I was most angry with that day wasn't Sergeant Williams, though I certainly gave her every right to be angry with me. I was angry with myself. For being so small. For being so blind. That footage, seeing myself, it was the most horrifying mirror I have ever looked into. He spoke then not as an officer, but as a man. He talked about the mandatory counseling he'd undergone, the difficult conversations with his family, the deep sense of shame that had plagued him. He spoke of the long, hard road of looking inward and not liking what he found. "I believed the badge made me someone. I was wrong. The badge is a tool. The person wearing it is the responsibility. I failed that day. I failed Chloe Williams. I failed Sergeant Williams. I failed this community. And I failed myself." He turned to look directly at Chloe. "Chloe, you were braver than I was that day. You stood your ground and you spoke your truth, even when a grown man was mocking you for it. I am sorry, from the bottom of my heart, for the pain I caused you. Your mother is a hero, and you are her daughter. Thank you for your courage. It's a courage I'm still trying to learn." Tears were streaming down Chloe's face now, but she held his gaze, nodding slowly, an acceptance of the apology that was as mature as the offense had been cruel. Dan then turned to Maya. "Sergeant Williams, you didn't just school me on the sidewalk. You gave me an education in integrity, in strength, and in the true meaning of service. You held me accountable in a way that saved me from becoming a worse version of myself. I am grateful for your strength, and I am deeply, profoundly sorry for my disrespect to you and your service. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to try and do better." Maya gave a single, firm nod. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, that was a private journey, but it was an acknowledgement. A recognition of the work he had done. Dan turned back to the audience. "This isn't over for me. It's a journey. Every day, I have to choose to be better than I was that day. This department's new mission is my mission. To serve with humility. To protect with empathy. To never stop learning. Thank you for listening." He stepped back from the podium. For a moment, there was silence. Then, it started with a single pair of hands in the police section. Then, another. And then, a wave of applause swept through the room, not thunderous or celebratory, but deep, respectful, and cathartic. It was an acknowledgement of the difficulty of truth, of the courage it takes to change. Chief Edwards came forward and put a hand on Dan's shoulder. Then he gestured for Maya and Chloe to join them on stage. The four of them stood together, a powerful, unlikely image. The chief, the disgraced officer, the soldier, and the child. A picture of fracture and the difficult, imperfect work of repair. The event continued, with details of the new initiatives, but the emotional climax had passed. After the formalities, people mingled. Dan was surrounded by fellow officers offering quiet words of support. Veterans approached Maya, shaking her hand, a silent understanding passing between them. Later, as the crowd thinned, Dan saw Chloe standing by herself, looking at a display about the Youth Police Academy. He walked over slowly, giving her plenty of space. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi," she replied, looking up at him. "That's a cool patch," he said, pointing to her astronaut cat. A small smile touched her lips. "Thanks. My mom got it for me." They stood in silence for a moment. "I meant what I said, Chloe," he said. "Every word." "I know," she said. She looked at him, her head tilted. "Do you still think it's silly? To be proud of your mom?" Dan felt a lump in his throat. "No, Chloe. I think it's the least silly thing in the whole world." She nodded, satisfied. "Good." Maya walked over then, her timing, as always, impeccable. She looked at Dan, then at her daughter. "Ready to go, baby girl? I think we've earned that triple scoop ice cream cone now." "With sprinkles?" Chloe asked, her face lighting up. "With all the sprinkles," Maya confirmed, smiling. As they turned to leave, Maya paused and looked back at Dan. The hardness in her eyes was gone, replaced by something quieter, more measured. "You did good today, Brenner," she said. "The hard part starts tomorrow. Keep doing it." It was the first time she hadn't called him officer. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. "I will, Sergeant," he said. "I will." He watched them walk away, the soldier and her daughter, their heads close together, already debating the merits of chocolate versus strawberry. They stepped out into the afternoon sun, whole, resilient, and bound by a love that no man's ignorance could ever break. Dan Brenner stood alone for a moment in the emptying auditorium. The ghost of his laugh no longer haunted him. It now served as a reminder. A compass. The weight of the badge on his chest felt different. It felt earned. He walked outside, the sun warm on his face. The world hadn't changed. The streets were the same. But he was different. He had been broken open, and in the breaking, he had found a chance to finally become whole. The work wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Officer Dan Brenner felt ready for it. ###epilogue. 3 months later. The call was a routine wellness check. An elderly man hadn't picked up his newspapers for 2 days. A neighbor was worried. Officer Brenner knocked on the door. No answer. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. He found Mr. Henderson in his armchair, disoriented and dehydrated, but okay. Dan called an ambulance, made him tea, and waited with him, making small talk about the man's prize-winning roses. As the EMTs were loading Mr. Henderson into the ambulance, the old man grabbed Dan's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you, son," he whispered, his eyes fearful. "I was scared no one would come." Dan patted his hand. "We'll always come, sir. That's the job." He stood on the sidewalk, watching the ambulance pull away. A little girl from down the street was riding her bike in circles, her training wheels squeaking. She waved at him, a big, gap-toothed grin on her face. Dan Brenner waved back. And he smiled. It was a quiet victory. There was no camera to record it. No one would ever know about it. But he knew. And that was enough.